What do doctors mean when they talk about spiritual health? And did you know that your spiritual health can have a dramatic effect on your physical and emotional health? I'll tell you all about it on today's episode of Ask Dr. Walt.
Today, our health includes our mind, our body, and our spirit. Separating medical facts from fiction is the key that leads to wise decisions about our health and well-being. Unpacking the latest research is vital. Doing what works helps us live our best lives today. How can we live longer? How can we live healthier? Let's ask Dr. Walt on Liftable TV.
Hi everyone, I'm family physician Dr. Walt Larimore, and I'm happy that you're taking the time today to join me in my home office as we continue our discussion about some of the essentials of becoming healthy. We've begun reviewing my top 10 recommendations for you to consider to become healthier physically, emotionally, mentally, relationally, and spiritually. Now, in previous episodes, we've already covered the essentials of true health, self-care, reducing sadness, that's stress, anxiety, and depression, forgiveness, and relationships. Today and in our next program, we'll cover the essential of one of my favorites, spiritual well-being. And then in future shows, we'll cover the essentials of positive self-image, discovering your destiny, personal responsibility, and teamwork in healthcare. Now, at the end of today's program, I'll tell you how to submit your questions for any of these four remaining topics. You guys are sending in great questions and comments, so let's get right to one of them. Let's start first with a question from Penny in Colorado Springs. She writes, Dr. Walt, will just any type of spirituality or religiosity work to improve health? Does it make a difference if you attend services but don't believe? Great question, Penny, especially for starting this show. And let me answer your question first by telling you a story. I met Jerry, he's a family physician, at a medical conference where I had given a presentation on how the latest medical research supported what I saw in my own practice for years, namely that a person's spiritual well-being had a significant positive impact on their physical, emotional, and relational health. Jerry told me, he said, I don't see that in my practice. In fact, he said, the church-going folks I care for don't seem very healthy at all. So I asked him this. I said, do you have any way to assess their spiritual health? And he shook his head and said, should I? And I immediately thought about Fran. She was a patient who had been a decade-long inspiration to me before she died at the age of 92. I told Jerry that Fran attended church regularly, but her spiritual health went far beyond church attendance. First of all, she had a personal relationship with God. And secondly, she used that to reach out. She volunteered to help others in her community whenever she could. Her spiritual life was in and outside of the church walls, and she had been doing both for more than 75 years. You see, Fran was a woman of deep personal faith. Her religious beliefs actually changed her behavior and attitude 7 days a week. She rarely visited my office, not for more than once or twice a year. But when she did, she always made some reference to her love for God and her commitment to her personal spiritual journey. During our last visit, and I actually journaled what she said this, I know I'm not going to live forever, but who would want to? I feel pretty good right now, but I'll be jumping for joy when I meet my Creator face to face. Her face literally glowed, and she explained to me, she wrote, for twice as long as you've been alive, I've been enjoying His companionship and thanking Him for His faithfulness in helping me be who He created me to be. I talk to God all the time, and I'm here to tell you, He listens. It's been a good life walking hand in hand with Him and other folks who know Him, just like I do. Well, I've got to tell you, my friend Jerry, the family physician, looked perplexed. Wow, he said, I never had a patient say anything like that. He thought a moment, and then his eyes widened. I think I see what you're saying, Walt. It's not religion, but a personal relationship with God that makes the difference. I think I get it, Jerry said. It's not being in church, it's church in and through you. And I remember smiling and saying, almost. But actually, Jerry, it's Jesus in and through you. You see, my physician friend had begun to make the connection between the kind of positive spirituality I was talking about and how it affects a person's overall well-being. You see, there's a difference between what I like to call true or positive spirituality and an external religion in which people go through the motions of religious duties, but lack any personal relationship with God. Well, let's go to your questions about spiritual health. So this one, if I can get it, here you go. This one comes from Tina in Winter Garden, Florida. She writes this. She says, Dr. Walt, what do you mean by positive spirituality? Well, great question. Tina, the latest medical research supports what I and the majority of practicing physicians observe in practice, namely that a person's spiritual health has a significant positive impact on their relational health, their emotional health, and their physical health. But again, there's a huge difference between what I call biblical or true or positive spirituality and an external religion in which people just go through the motions of religious duties, but lack a personal relationship with God. In fact, in a research article that I authored for health professionals, I wrote this. Positive spirituality is distinguished from the broader terms such as faith or morality or religion with these factors. First, positive spirituality is an ever-evolving, authentic, and personal relationship with God that is not bound by race, ethnicity, economic status, or class. Second, positive spirituality promotes love, including the wellness and welfare of others and self. It doesn't kill people or cut off heads. Third, positive spirituality includes the beliefs and values by which an individual lives, not just religious duty. And most importantly, positive spirituality results in the visible spiritual fruit of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And most of you will recognize this last section as the fruit of the Spirit that Paul talks about in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. And as I've memorized, meditated on this verse for over 40 years, I think one of the things I've learned is that the key fruit, the main grace here, is love. In fact, I consider the other 8 fruits, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, are all manifestations of the main fruit of the Spirit, which is love. And I like to think of it this way. Joy is love singing. Peace is love resting. Patience is love enduring. Kindness is love's true touch. Goodness is love's character. Faithfulness is love's habit. Gentleness is love's true touch. And self-control is love holding the reins. Don't you love that? You see, researchers have shown that those who internalize biblical teachings in such a way that they change your beliefs and your behavior from the inside out. In other words, those who frequently pray, apply what the Bible says to their lives, believe they have a close relationship with God, and practice what they preach. Those people have high levels of satisfaction in life. Those people have a sense of well-being, and those people have increased levels of overall happiness. In another article that I wrote for doctors with 4 colleagues, it was partially titled Positive Spirituality, the Forgotten Factor. We reviewed the evidence showing that positive spirituality improves overall health and well-being, including psychological, relational, and physical health outcomes. Hope that's helpful. Our next question comes from Dwayne in Indianapolis. He writes, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I find that my patients who internalize their spiritual beliefs tend to be healthier emotionally and mentally, as well as having more positive relationships. Do you find the same? Absolutely. Sounds, Dwayne, like my anecdotal experience and yours in our practices is actually backed by solid research, which indicates there are far fewer health benefits when one just goes through the motions of religious tradition. Now, I want to be clear. Religiosity does have some health benefits. I'll talk about that in a minute. But people who merely attend worship services and programs in their religious community tend to experience that external faith that I was talking about, that is far less likely to be associated with positive physical or mental health outcomes. Now, the researchers on this call these folks extrinsics because they have an outward or an extrinsic spirituality or religiousness. In fact, research since the 1960s have reported that extrinsics use religion in a, and I quote, a self-serving or utilitarian way. One of them wrote this: persons with this orientation may find religion useful in a variety of ways to provide security and solace, sociability and distraction, status and self-justification. The embraced creed, though, is lightly held or else selectively shaped to meet more primary needs. In theological terms, the extrinsic turns to God, but without turning away from self. My friend Dale Matthews, an MD who has written extensively about religious extrinsics who use their religion, as he says, quote, a means to obtaining another end, health, security, status, power, even though they may not be consciously aware of their own ulterior motives. I love his book called The Faith Factor. And in that book, Dr. Matthews writes, these people ask not what they can do for their religion, but what religion can do for them. Well, as you can imagine, people who rate higher on the true spirituality scales, those with positive spirituality, who internalize biblical teachings compared to those relying on external religion, are far more likely to experience physical, emotional, and relational health benefits. Substantial benefits. Substantial. Our next question comes from Kim in Seattle. She asks, what are some ways a personal relationship with God changes health? In other words, Kim, you hear me saying that it changed health. You just want to know how in the world does it? Well, let me give you just a few examples. Recovery from major depression has been shown to occur much more rapidly and completely for those with the highest ratings of true spirituality. Lowered blood pressure, better surgical outcomes, less substance abuse, and longer survival have also been noticed in the research. A dear friend and colleague is Dr. Harold Koenig of Duke University. He authored the Oxford University Handbook on Religion and Health, and he has reviewed thousands of studies from 1872 up to the present. What I call positive or biblical spirituality, he calls intrinsic religiosity or spirituality, and he abbreviates it with the abbreviation R/S. So let me just show you some of his research. When it comes to emotional health, for example, Dr. Koenig concludes this: there is ample evidence that R/S, because it facilitates coping and imbues negative events with meaning and purpose, is related to better mental health. Just a few examples: less depression, lower stress, less anxiety, greater well-being, and more positive emotions. Who doesn't want that? Well, he goes on. Furthermore, several randomized controlled trials have shown that R/S improves mental health. There's also much evidence that poor mental health has adverse physiologic consequences that worsen physical health and shorten the lifespan. Thus, it stands to reason that R/S might influence physical health through physiological and psychological pathways. Well, when it comes to relational health, Dr. Koenig writes, R/S is associated with greater social support, greater marital stability, less crime and delinquency, and greater social capital. RS beliefs and doctrines encourage the development of human virtues like honesty, courage, dependability, altruism, generosity, forgiveness, self-discipline, patience, humility, and other characteristics that promote social relationships. And who doesn't want that? He adds this: social factors in turn are known to influence both mental health and physical health and predict greater longevity. You're more likely to live longer. He continues again, if R/S boosts supportive social interactions and increases community trust and involvement, then it should ultimately influence physical health as well, which it does. When it comes to physical health, Dr. Koenig writes this: finally, RS promotes better health behaviors and is associated with less alcohol and drug abuse, less cigarette smoking, more physical activity and exercise, better diet, safer sexual practices in the overwhelming majority of studies that have examined these relationships. Living a healthier lifestyle, of course, will result in better physical health and greater longevity. You see the connection? I think of it this way, and I told you this in our first episode on True Health, that I look at health kind of like an automobile or a vehicle with four wheels. And one is the physical health wheel, and the other is the emotional, mental health wheel, and then the relational health wheel, and the spiritual health wheel. But folks, they're all interconnected. It's the spiritual health wheel that's connected to the power steering. But they're all critical. And if those wheels are out of balance or not inflated, your life's going to be rougher than your Creator designed it to be. According to George Barna, who randomly surveyed more than 3,000 adults in the U.S., among those who are the most satisfied with their present life, of those, 91% claim to have this true or positive spirituality. And this dramatic improvement in their emotional health results in what Barna calls an upbeat frame of mind. Among folks with positive spirituality, very, very few are lonely. Very few are in serious debt. Very few are stressed out. Now, Barna also reported that although agnostics and atheists are slightly less than 8% of the U.S. population, they possess self-perceptions, beliefs, if you would, that clearly stand out from those who maintain a definable faith preference. And this non-faith segment of our population placed highest in claiming to be stressed out, concerned about the future, and lonely. In fact, the atheists and agnostics were the least likely to be satisfied with their life and were the most unconcerned about America's moral state. You see, there's a huge difference between an internal positive spirituality and external religion in which people go through the motions of religious duties but lack a personal relationship with God. For those of us who are believers and followers of Jesus, we know that this personal relationship with God through Christ changes our lives and it changes our eternity. Our next question comes from Edwina in Charlottesville, Virginia, and she asks, when it comes to spiritual health, Dr. Walt, what do you think is the most important component? Wow, great question. I think to me, the most important elements of spiritual wellness are seeking God, knowing God, loving God, pleasing Him as our Creator. I mean, if we believe in and trust God, if we make having an intimate relationship with Him a priority, if He controls and empowers our lives, and we seek our purpose in His grand design, I call it His divine design, we're much more likely to experience wholeness at the deepest level of our being. I mean, I've told you before that our word health, the English word health, is derived from an Old English word that means whole, W-H-O-L-E. The definition of health is intended to include those things that make a person whole. Obviously, this means much more than physical well-being. I love the quote of St. Augustine. He was a 4th century theologian who wrote in his book, Confessions, "O Lord, you have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." Also, I love what Episcopal Bishop Edmund Lee Browning wrote. He says, what does it take to be happy? And then he answers his question. He says, I think we're happiest when we know ourselves to be in the service of God, focused on a reality larger than ourselves. It's why we are here. In the Message version of the Bible, in Psalm 119:80, the writer says this, let me live whole and holy, soul and body, so I can always walk with my head held high. Again, when we know God personally, when our personal relationship with Him it's both deep and sweet, we're much more likely to experience wholeness and holiness despite our circumstances. So you may be thinking, Well, I don't have that type of relationship with God. I don't know God that way. How does that type of relationship begin? And the Bible's clear. Each one of us is God designed in His own image. But we've all kind of turned away from that divine design to pursue life after our own desires and plans. And this results in broken and unhealthy physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual lives. Yet because of His deep, deep love for each of us, God sent His Son, Jesus, to live a perfect, exemplary life and then to voluntarily submit to be mocked, beaten, humiliated, tortured, and crucified to pay the ransom for and redeem us from the eternal penalty of all of our offenses, of all of our wrongdoings. Through accepting His sacrifice, through trusting Him for what He gave for our wrongs and our wrongdoings, by submitting to His lordship, His guidance, His leadership, and His wisdom, then every day we'll be able to follow His will, pursue His design, and trust that His grace of love and forgiveness will work to bring about His good pleasure of equipping, enabling, and empowering us to live healthful, whole, holy lives. And if we choose to abide in Him and His Word, the Bible, He will continuously produce in and through us that spiritual fruit I talked about earlier that endures regardless of our circumstances, regardless of the state of our relational, emotional, or physical health. He's there to walk with us through them. But hear me clearly. I'm not saying that a personal relationship with God is an insurance policy, a guarantee against disease. It's not. I mean, we all know healthy, spiritually grounded people who die prematurely all the time. And all of us have lost friends and family, wonderful folks who died far too young. But the medical research is clear that in general, the deeper a true spiritual positive faith, the more likely we are to have a better physical, emotional, and relational health. They are much more likely to cope well with illness and to recover from disease are those who know God personally. Well, let me end our time with a quick story and my prescription for today. I love the 2008 CNN report about 114-year-old Gertrude Baines. She was born to enslaved parents near Atlanta in 1894. She was described as spry and cheerful and talkative. And Miss Baines was asked by the correspondent to explain why she thought she had lived so long. And her reply was simple. She said, God. Ask Him. I took good care of myself the way He wanted me to. I think the best way I know of to become a highly healthy person is to develop a true spirituality, a positive spirituality, a biblical spirituality that can result in the most important and enduring form of health and vitality. But unfortunately, according to Dr. Paul Dibdahl, while most Americans claim to be Christians, closer inspection reveals that only a minority have made a personal commitment to Jesus that remains meaningful in their life today. And according to Barna's research, approximately 60% of Americans have not made such a personal commitment. That means over 170 million people in North America have yet to commit themselves to God. Are you one of them? If you are, you may want to know how you can have that personal relationship with God starting today. And I explain this in a web post of mine. I call it the most important blog I've ever written. Let me encourage you to find it. You can find it at tinyurl.com/my-most-important-blog-ever. That's tinyurl.com. My most important blog ever. And I believe it's my most important blog ever. But let me just summarize that blog in 46 words. Number one, if you don't have a personal relationship with God, you cannot experience the whole and holy life that He's designed for you. Number two, Jesus is the key to knowing God deeply and sweetly. Number three, you can choose to accept or reject God's plan for a whole and holy health for you. Again, let me encourage you, go to tinyurl.com, my most important blog ever. I'll be praying for you about that. Well, my time's up for today, and to continue your journey to become a highly healthy person, next time I'll have part 2 of the essential of spiritual well-being and how to cultivate a positive spirituality. By the way, I go into far more detail and tips about positive spirituality in 2 of my best-selling books. One is Fit Over 50. By the way, it's for people of any age. And the second one is 10 Essentials of Happy, Healthy People. And you can find these and my other books at drwalt.com. Just click on the tab that says books. By the way, I'd love to hear from you. What questions do you have about the association of your spiritual health to your physical, emotional, and relational health? Just email them to me at drwalt@liftable.tv. And you can add any other general health questions. What we're going to do is kind of gather those together for future shows. So that's drwalt@liftable.tv. So until our next visit, dear friends, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. I'm Dr. Walt Larimore. I don't even know my own name. I'm Dr. Walt Larimore, and I look forward to seeing you on my next episode of Ask Dr. Walt.